Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, October 13th, 2020, and today I'm going to be taking a look at a 2020 election prediction 3 weeks until the election. We're 21 days away and the electoral map hasn't changed too much. Now, we are going to see another state added into the Joe Biden column compared to where the previous map was. This is due to the fact that Joe Biden is riding high. As we take a look at the national average, Joe Biden is now up 11 points nationally. While this probably will end up with him leading by 7% on election day, it is also very possible that these polls could be moderately accurate and we could see a potential double-digit win for Joe Biden. Now, the reason why I think that this is just such an unlikely scenario is because, number one, in 2016, national polls did overestimate Hillary Clinton. And also looking at the how divided we are as Americans, it's very hard for me to see a situation in which Joe Biden somehow defeats Donald Trump by double digits, but the data is disagreeing with me at that point. Consistently, for practically the past week, Joe Biden has held a double-digit lead over Donald Trump nationwide, and only until today has it ticked up to an 11-point lead. So this 10.6% lead that Joe Biden has is nothing to laugh at. I mean, for the Trump campaign, this is very bad news. They're entering into the final stretch of the campaign season. You can see that November is right around here, and they have had polls through March, through October. $1 billion has been spent on the Republican side for Donald Trump and Republican candidates, and they still lose the national average by 10.6% as it stands today. So keep that in mind when we're making this prediction. Let's characterize all of the safe Trump states. I don't think many of these are too surprising, really, to anyone. Let me get rid of Nebraska second and first. These are just all of the states that I think will be considered safe for the 2020 election. Now, I am debating as to whether or not I would characterize Kansas as safe. If we look at the numbers here, in Kansas, it actually isn't too large of a margin for Trump. He's only up 6.6%. I'll reassess by the time we make our new prediction, but for right now, I'm going to keep it in the safe Republican column. I expect the Republicans to do much better than what those polls are estimating. But Donald Trump has 82 electoral votes that are considered to be safe. That's pretty surprising. Generally, we'd be at 125 at least. Generally, in a normal election, Texas would be thrown in there and it'd jump up an additional 38 electoral votes. But today, it's at 82. It was 125 roughly a year ago today. So numbers stand 82 for Trump. For Joe Biden, he has a number of safe states as well. They should total up to around 181 electoral votes. I don't have any states that are moving into the safe Democratic column, so it should just be Maine's 1st district. And also, might be missing something here in the state of, that's weird that I'm missing a state that I normally characterize as, okay, well, the Democrats are at 181 safe electoral votes. And let's go ahead and get started and take a look at some of these more competitive races. Now, I know you're shocked to see 275 tossable electoral votes. So let me put a lot of your questions to rest really quickly. I've yet to characterize likely states. These are states that are pretty solid for the candidates right now and probably won't change over the next 21 days, but it's not safe. It means that it won't be a 15-point margin of victory or higher, while it still probably has a 90 to 99% chance of going for a certain candidate. It just means that the race is a little bit more competitive and that the electorate there isn't exactly as lopsided as Maryland or Wyoming. So 181 electoral votes for Biden, 82 for Trump. Biden takes the lead with roughly 100 more electoral votes, 99 to be exact. Let's get into the likely states. Now, for Donald Trump, he has a number of likely states. He has Missouri, Indiana, South Carolina, Mississippi, Montana, and Alaska. Now, I know you're surprised to see South Carolina, Alaska, and all the rest of these states as likely. But in 2016, South Carolina and Alaska were actually likely, and Mississippi, Missouri, and Indiana were in 2012, and Montana. So I'm not basing it just off the fact that it was likely in 2012. These states were actually way more competitive in 2008. I'm doing it based off the fact that we will likely see a return from those Obama, Trump, now Biden voters that will give Joe Biden a pretty significant portion of the vote in these traditionally Republican states. It's not too out of the question to see how someone who could outperform Hillary Clinton's margin in these these likely states, and make them move from a safe characterization down to likely. Alaska and South Carolina, already likely states, would just remain with their current characterization. Now, there's one electoral vote that I would consider to be likely for Donald Trump, and that is Nebraska's 1st district. I know it's surprising to see. We never talk about Nebraska's 1st district, but it'll probably be likely for the GOP. We're talking a 12, 13-point victory. So Donald Trump has jumped up to 125. Now let's get into the likely Democratic states. I actually have some race changes in some of these battleground states that I'm going to be making likely for the Democrats rather than lean. But we'll start off with the states that I normally characterize as likely. We have Oregon. Oregon just is expected to be a 13, 14-point margin of victory for Biden. Trump doesn't really have a chance. It's just not safe. Colorado and Virginia, traditionally swing states. Trump doesn't have a chance either this election unless something drastically changes in the final 3 weeks of the campaign. But this puts Biden at 210. There's another likely state from my previous prediction that I'm going to roll over, Minnesota, and the final one is Maine. Now, I do, like I said, have changes in some of these ratings. I do want to characterize 2 new states as likely. I forgot Michigan was also considered likely by my ratings, but there are 2 states, I think they're pretty obvious at this point, considering that I just went to Michigan, that I'm now going to make likely for Joe Biden. And this comes as a result of the fact that they are roughly all polling around the same. So I'm not going to say just because, Michigan is 0.3 higher of a lead for Biden than Wisconsin or Pennsylvania, that somehow, these states should not be characterized the same way. And no, I am not basing it purely off polling data, but it's on the top of a number of other factors that have really spelled out bad news for President Trump, whether it's the approval ratings of the Democratic governors there, or we're expecting to see increased turnout, where we see now the white flight away from Donald Trump. The same people who elected him in 2016 are now returning to the Joe Biden column or the Democratic column where they previously voted. I mean, Biden makes a point to note that he saved the auto industry in Michigan. Rightfully so. He did. The Obama administration bailed out Michigan, and they rewarded him for it multiple times, whether it was through Democratic officials or 2012. And if we're looking at Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, these are 2 states that were absolutely affected by the economy. And one of the main reasons why these 3 states flipped in 2016 was the issue of the economy. While Hillary Clinton, yes, was hated in these 3 states, it didn't necessarily account for the fact that that was the reason she lost. Presidential candidates are typically hated. Joe Biden is out of the ordinary by being approved of. And if we're looking at both of these states, first of all, Biden is from Pennsylvania. I really think that helps. And he's making a final push. What we saw with Hillary Clinton in the final stretch of the campaign season was that her main focus was Florida. It was North Carolina. It was going for major plays. It was Georgia. It was Iowa, Ohio, which we all saw go to Donald Trump very early in the evening. But the Rust Belt was what hurt her because she had not visited Wisconsin. In fact, up until Joe Biden became the nominee, no Democratic nominee had visited Wisconsin since November 6th, 2012. 8 years had gone by until Joe Biden went to that state and spoke. For Pennsylvania, this state was heavily targeted by the Clinton campaign. This was just poor messaging and the fact that these 3 states generally vote together. When we see a trend happening in Michigan or Wisconsin, it's likely happening in Pennsylvania as well. So I didn't think that it made sense to me or to any of you guys that Michigan and Minnesota would be likely, whereas Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, sure, voted to the right of that state, but only marginally, and they're roughly polling around the same. Michigan is the most Democratic, followed by Wisconsin, then Pennsylvania. That's a little bit of a workaround from 2016, but these states generally will all vote the same. They all have Biden up by 7 points or higher. So these race rating changes put Joe Biden at 268. This is before lean and tilt states. So what happens next? Well, we're taking a look at an electoral map where Joe Biden wasn't exactly supposed to do super well. I mean, a lot of the early predictions said it was going to be 278 to 260. Or 290 to 248 at best for the Democratic Party. And the reason for that was because people expected Donald Trump's base to stay with him. I mean, I expected it. The political pundits on MSNBC, Fox News, CNN, they all expected it, and rightfully so. Donald Trump's base, while it didn't come out in full force in 2018, 2010 was not exactly a predictor of what happened in 2012. So we saw the midterm elections as a referendum against President Trump, but it wasn't exactly this is where Trump's campaign ends, because a midterm is never good for an incumbent president. But what we see now is that the energy from the 2018 midterm elections is being drawn over into the 2020 election. What I mean by that? The polling averages are roughly the same. The polling averages actually underestimated Democrats 2 years ago. They won the popular vote by 8% in the House elections, by 20% in the Senate elections. And if we look at the Senate elections coming up and the House elections coming up, the Democrats, for the first time in the entire campaign history, are now expected to gain seats. They flipped 41 in 2018, and now they're expected to flip other districts that could possibly go to the Democrats. That, this is something we're seeing that's unprecedented. Yes, the Democrats typically do better in a regular election year, but not exactly when they're up by this much. I mean, it happened in 2008, But this election, had you told me it would be similar to 2008, 6 months ago, I would have thought you were lying. We could have never envisioned that 3 weeks before the election, I could sleep through 3 weeks. I could sleep until Election Day, and we probably wouldn't see the national average change too much. 3 weeks to Election Day, Biden is up by 11%. Oh, but weren't the polls wrong in 2016? Wasn't Hillary Clinton up in a New York Times poll by 14%, a CNN poll by 14%? Yes, but those were outliers. She never once hit 52.5% on an average. Those polls were outliers. That's the regular for the Biden campaign. This is an outlier. Biden plus 17. Biden plus 9 and Biden plus 13, not outliers. Biden plus 10, Biden plus 12, not outliers. Why? Because Joe Biden is doing considerably better than Hillary Clinton. So I really do hope that this 2016 was wrong. That's why 2020 will be wrong discussion stops after we see on November 3rd that polling data that has been correct for decades that just missed 3 states in 2016, 4 states if you include Nevada, 4 states in 2016 are somehow entirely, illegitimate. And we will see come November 3rd that a lot of these polling data that we see today is accurate. But anyways, when it went off on a little bit of a tangent there, let's get into the lean Republican states. I do want to bring Donald Trump's numbers up just because I feel bad at this point. But actually, there's only one state that I consider to be lean for Donald Trump. And this has to do with the fact that I'm changing one of my previous lean Republican states to a different characterization. It's Texas. This is 38 electoral votes. This is crucial to every Republican and their victories. I don't think a single Republican has won without Texas in over half a century. So Texas is super important for the Republican Party. It's the second most populous state. It's expected to reach 41 electoral votes by 2024. And as we see it now, the Democratic Party has a very real shot. I know a lot of people on here, if you're, supporting President Trump, some people do find it laughable that I consider Texas to be a swing state. But I want you to actually take a look at the data. In 2018, Ted Cruz, probably one of the most well-known senators in the country, won by only 2% in a Senate race in Texas against someone who advocated a year later for buying back guns. Texas, 38 electoral votes, is a lean for the GOP. And even if you look at, a number of other conservative forecasters, it's still considered to be likely. This is not a safe state anymore for the GOP. I made a video about this. Once Texas goes, the GOP will likely fall apart, at least the modern GOP. They will likely remain for decades. But for Texas specifically, this is a state where the Democratic Party, for whatever reason, has made big inroads in. And if you look at the 2016 data, if a lot of people want to bring up 2016, which I see a lot, ask yourself, go back to Texas, Real Clear Politics average, Trump was up 12% on Election Day. He won by 9%. The polls were off and against the Democrats by 3%. Are you comfortable today knowing Trump is only up by 1.4% in Texas? Even if the polls were as wrong as they were 4 years ago, Biden wins Texas. Again, ask yourself, is this really a comfortable margin? Yes, Texas will probably go red, but you cannot deny the fact that Texas is closer than it has been in the past. As much as people would like to believe that Donald Trump has gained support, I know people personally who have voted for Trump in 2016 that are not voting for him now, and we see that reflected across everywhere in the country. Everywhere. And he's bringing down Republicans with him. So Texas is the sole lean Republican state, which means every remaining Republican electoral vote that he's going to win will be with a tilt margin, which means less than 1%, which means it's absolutely in range for Joe Biden on Election Day. But let's get into the lean Democratic states. These aren't too surprising. Nevada, New Hampshire. These are 2 states that I consider to be lean for the Democratic Party. I consider Arizona to be lean as well. I think that this state is going to go to the Democrats probably by 2, 3, 4% margin. Mark Kelley will probably win by 5, 6, 7, 8% over Martha McSally. But all in all, Arizona will likely be a state that the Democrats will rely on in the future. Yes, we were working in an environment where the Republican is not really liked. It will probably be a swing state, but still leaning to the Democrats. Very similar to North Carolina or Georgia or even Florida. So the Democrats are at 289. I have one more state to characterize as lean for the Democrats, and then we move into tilt characterizations. I forgot to characterize Nebraska's 2nd district, and for Trump, Maine's 2nd district as a lean district. The rest of these 84 electoral votes will be decided by a tilt margin, actually, minus 29. The state of Florida, I'm now moving into the lean Democratic column. This was tilt. I mean, I really did not want to call Florida. I've never moved it into anywhere further than lean for either party because I know that Florida is weird. We know Florida is weird. We've seen the headlines because they have laws that allow us to know exactly what happens down there. But looking at everything about Florida, I mean, its stereotype is weird, but 2000 is something that Democrats remember all too familiarly. The Supreme Court is super important in this election. And if it does come down to a point where, Donald Trump does try to invalidate mail-in ballots, we're probably going to see a repeat of a very, very long election with government officials trying to just maneuver this entire environment. But Florida, I went on to the Supreme Court because Florida had a very interesting situation there in 2000. It probably will be close. But what we've seen now, yes, Biden has lost 2, 3, 4% amongst Hispanic voters from 2016. And if that was the case, and if, Joe Biden was just retaining the voters Hillary Clinton won in 2016, we would have said Florida, don't even ask. I mean, if the Hispanic voters aren't voting for Biden in the same way they voted for Clinton and he wasn't changing her numbers anywhere else, it wouldn't even go to the Democrats whatsoever. But what Joe Biden is doing is not only is he improving amongst white voters, he's doing it amongst the senior demographic group specifically. This is a huge voting block in Florida. This is the area where Trump said recently that Biden, doesn't do anything for Florida seniors because this voting group has slipped away from President Trump due to his handling of the COVID-19 pandemic. We've seen his approval rating drop, which directly correlates with his numbers dropping nationwide. And Florida, and the Trump campaign is going to hate to hear this, Florida is going to move into the lean Democratic column for Joe Biden. And it's just, a state that they really need to win because it's 29 electoral votes. It's the third most populous state that they relied on in 2016. And it's lean for the Democrats as it stands today. And the data does seem to suggest that Biden might actually win it by a pretty strong margin, 5%, which I don't think will happen. But again, who am I to argue with the numbers? So the tilt Democratic and Republican states are up. Now, all of these states were previously Republican states on my last prediction. Georgia, North Carolina, Ohio, and Iowa. These are all states that Donald Trump won in 2016. He won Iowa by 9, Ohio by 8, North Carolina by 4, Georgia by 5. So why are they all of a sudden super competitive? Well, what we see across the country is that Donald Trump's margins are narrowing up. Enough so that some of these states, while I do expect Donald Trump to carry 3 out of the 4 of these, Joe Biden is now the favorite in one of them. And I'm sure you can guess it, but we're going to go to the 2 Republican states that I haven't really changed too heavily since the beginning of the campaign season, Iowa and Ohio. I had Joe Biden up in Ohio for a very short period of time. But since then, Trump has been leading. Iowa, I don't think has changed much, at least through 2020. And as we look at both of these states, Ohio has been correct for 60 years, and I would hate for it to be wrong this year. I do hope that it votes with the presidential election winner just because of the fact that I want that streak to continue so we can continue looking at Ohio, but it likely has moved a little bit too far to the right. And Joe Biden, while he is a very strong candidate and making a very major play for Ohio, it is possible Donald Trump retains that 8% support that put him over the top 4 years ago, and it could narrow down to 1%, 2%, probably less than 1%, but it could still end up being a victory. Iowa's the same way. While Iowa and Ohio actually both went to Obama in 2008 and 2012, Donald Trump broke numbers here that Obama could not reach. And that was due to the fact that a number of previously Obama voters flipped to Donald Trump, whether it was the issue of the economy or it was the issue of immigration or jobs, whatever it was. They found something in Donald Trump that they did not find in Hillary Clinton. But I think that a lot of them are starting to find it again in Joe Biden. I mean, yes, Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, but she had very little impact on what actually happened in the White House. Joe Biden was the vice president. I mean, he served under the same person that they elected twice. And his approval rating wasn't exactly too bad. Obama's approval rating at the time Trump won was 55% nationwide. So while the majority of Americans approved of Barack Obama as a president, they still elected Donald Trump just because they viewed him better than Hillary Clinton, at least for their specific issues. So both of these states, I think, are tilt for Trump. But right now, I think that Biden is the favorite in the state of North Carolina. Let me walk you through that. Well, North Carolina actually has been pretty close and has been close throughout the entirety of the campaign season. But today, he leads by 3.1%. We've seen new things come out with Cal Cunningham about the whole sexting allegation, but it actually hasn't hurt him. Only 13% of voters say this is disqualifying to be a candidate. 51% of them say, handle it with your family, we don't care. And that we don't care vote will likely help elect Cal Cunningham to be the next United States Senator. And actually, he probably will run ahead of Joe Biden. I mean, I put Joe Biden ahead by less than a percentage point. But this battleground state has never really been a Democratic stronghold since, I think, the 60s. I mean, the Democratic Party has not really had too much luck in this state, whether it's a Senate election or whether it's House elections, whether it's due to gerrymandering, but that's a whole other issue. The only place where they actually can be pretty sure of is the governor's race. But for the presidential race, Donald Trump has pushed away a number of these voters that voted for him in 2016. Now, looking back, 8 years ago, Barack Obama lost the state of North Carolina to Mitt Romney. In 2008, he won it, but only by 14,000 votes. It was very close, and, we didn't really expect it to see North Carolina go blue 4 years later. And if Joe Biden does end up running for re-election, assuming he wins this presidency, he probably won't win North Carolina again. But North Carolina does move away from a certain political party heavily. In 2016, Donald Trump won it by 4%. Today, Joe Biden leads by 3%. This is a pretty significant swing. Now, Joe Biden's numbers are pretty strong. I think being at 49.3% is very good. Donald Trump won a number of these battleground states with a plurality. Hillary Clinton lost with 45% of the vote. That's just because of the fact that third-party voters gained a pretty significant portion of the vote, and Donald Trump and her were just so disliked that they didn't really win a majority in most of their battleground states. And for Donald Trump to have won in 2016 with a plurality in a number of these states, I find it really hard for him to, even if he holds that plurality of voters, win over the Clinton voters plus a number of those third-party voters that are now voting for Biden. Because what we see now is that data shows that 75% of third-party voters from 2016 are now backing the former vice president, which means Donald Trump has a lot more work to do. Because not only is he combating the Clinton 2016 numbers, he's combating possible loss on his side and 75% expected loss amongst third-party voters. And North Carolina, I think this is a state that could truly go to Joe Biden, especially since Joe Biden now has an 87% chance of winning the presidency. North Carolina specifically, it's a little bit closer, but if we look at the chance, 65% is pretty strong. So all in all, I think that North Carolina will go to Joe Biden, but Georgia retains in the Republican column. Now, Georgia is very weird. I mean, we probably will see Donald Trump come out on top, but as we see, looking at Georgia, we see a lot of people voting. It's a state that the Democratic Party has been targeting for quite some time, and the last time it went to the Democrats was in 1992. It's been quite some time since Georgia has gone to the Democratic Party, but it's not out of the question. Georgia today actually, I believe, has Biden up, and I'm not blindly following the polls. If I was, then Georgia would have been a blue state on my map, but I do think that Donald Trump will come ahead in Georgia, but at the same time, you can't deny the fact that he's underwater in this state, and this is a state that he won by 5% in 2016. So while he still may be the favorite, just by holding on to that 2016 support, still losing a pretty significant portion of it, but still holding on to it, it still doesn't even get him to 270. Barely 204. Considering that Iowa, Ohio, and Georgia could very well go to the Democrats, North Carolina is the only Democratic state, so they don't have much to worry about there. The Republican Party is not in a good position entering past the 2020 election and entering into November. So the final map, 21 days before the election, 334 for Joe Biden, flipping Arizona, Nebraska's 2nd District, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida. And for Donald Trump, he doesn't flip any states, but he retains his swing states from 2016 of Texas, Iowa, Ohio, Georgia, and Maine's 2nd District. So that's pretty much it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord link for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my other 2020 election predictions if you want to go ahead and check those out as well. Again, thank you guys so much for watching. Please consider joining as a member on my channel, and I will see you all later today.